For generations, the Campbell family lived on the fringes of the Scottish Highlands, hidden away in crumbling stone cottages and dense, misty forests. Neighbours spoke in hushed tones of whispered rituals and strange disappearances, of children born with eerie features and families torn apart by secrecy. Outsiders rarely ventured close, and those who did rarely returned the same. Some say the land itself bears the marks of their dark practices, twisted paths that lead nowhere, and fires that burn without reason. Tonight we peel back the veil on centuries of whispered terror, forbidden rites, and chilling isolation. What really happened in those remote Highland valleys? What secrets did the Campbell family bury, and what horrors still linger? Prepare yourself. This story will take you into the shadows of a world you cannot imagine. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real events or people is purely coincidental. Chapter 1. Welcome to the Highland Shadows. Welcome back. For centuries, the Campbell family had vanished from maps and memory alike, dwelling in a remote corner of the Scottish Highlands where mist clung to the trees like a living thing. Travellers spoke of uneven paths that led nowhere, of cottages built from stone so old they seemed to grow from the earth itself. Locals avoided these lands, warning that those who lingered too long were marked by the family's shadow. The Campbells were no ordinary Highlanders. Stories whispered of generations bound together not just by blood but by obsession. An insular clan that mistrusted the outside world, their lives entwined with secrets darker than the heathered hills surrounding them. Some said their children bore peculiar features, uncanny smiles, or eyes that seemed far too knowing. Others murmured about nightly gatherings in the woods, where torches lit faces twisted with fear and fascination. Even during the daylight, the valley felt heavy, as if the air itself remembered every whispered sin, every broken promise, every life lost to the family's hidden rituals. Outsiders who dared approach the Campbell homestead reported hearing laughter echoing across the mist, laughter that carried both warmth and menace. And once the sun fell behind the peaks, the land seemed to breathe in darkness, hiding movements too quick, too quiet, for human eyes to follow. Yet curiosity always found a way. A stranger once left a note at the edge of the forest, claiming he had glimpsed the family in the moonlight, their faces glowing eerily in the shadows of twisted trees. The note ended abruptly, words smeared as if by trembling hands. They watch. They always watch. The locals burned the note and warned one another to speak of it to no one. Tonight, as we peer over the jagged edges of history and imagination, we step across that invisible bounds. Here begins the tale of the Campbell family, of isolation, of inbreeding, of secrets that grew like ivy over stone walls and across generations, a tale where ordinary rules no longer apply and where every whisper could be a warning. Before we continue with the story and unspeakable secrets, I want to ask something important. This channel is not for everyone. Only the bravest souls who dare to confirm the darkest chapters of history. If you made it this far, you are not like most people. You understand some truths are too horrifying to ignore. So hit that subscribe button and join our community of true mystery seekers. And tell me in the comments, what part of the UK are you listening from? Are you brave enough to hear a story like this from your own backyard? Chapter 2. The Campbell Homestead. The Campbell homestead was a place that seemed to exist out of time. Built from weathered stones, its walls had stood for generations, enduring wind, frost, and the slow creep of moss that crept across every surface. From a distance, it appeared unremarkable, a simple Highland cottage amid rolling hills and tangled woods. But those who approached closely often felt an uneasy chill, as if the stones themselves exhaled a warning. Inside, the air smelled of damp timber, earth, and something less definable, a faint coppery scent that clung to the nostrils and refused to leave. Rooms were sparsely furnished, but every item had a peculiar placement, as if the family had created a living labyrinth of their own design. Old portraits lined the walls, the eyes of ancestors unnervingly lifelike, following intruders with a gaze both protective and accusatory. Even the windows told stories. Tiny, shuttered openings allowed slivers of light to pierce the gloom, casting shapes that resembled elongated fingers or distorted figures. At night, the moonlight traced patterns across the floors, illuminating scratches and marks in the timber, symbols and sigils, their meanings long forgotten by anyone outside the family. Locals whispered that these were not mere decorations, but protective wards, or perhaps warnings. Outside, the forest pressed close against the house, branches scratching against stone and glass. Some nights, when the wind was right, the sounds of faint chanting carried from the woods, hollow, rhythmic, impossible to pinpoint. Outsiders who ventured too close reported seeing shadows moving between the trees, shadows that did not match any human form, and lights that flickered and vanished without explanation. The family itself was rarely seen, and when they were, their presence was unsettling. Faces were sharp, features refined but unnerving, eyes glinting with an intelligence that bordered on predatory. Children ran silently through the corridors, vanishing when approached. Even the dogs, loyal creatures by nature, would growl at the unseen, bristling at presences hidden in corners. Despite all warnings, fascination drew people to the homestead. Rumors of hidden chambers, secret rituals, and family curses had circulated for decades. Few dared step inside, but the stories alone were enough to create a chilling reputation, one that kept the wider world at a cautious distance. And yet, something lingered in the air, a promise of revelation for those brave enough to uncover it. Next, we discover the dark whispers of the Campbell children, whose laughter in the halls masked secrets no outsider could imagine. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Past. The Campbell family's history was not written in books or remembered in local chronicles. It existed only in whispers, passed quietly from one generation to the next, like smoke curling through the Highland forests. Old villagers spoke of events so strange and unsettling that many refused to recall them aloud. Yet every story carried a chilling consistency. The family's isolation was deliberate, their lineage carefully preserved, and their rituals forbidden. Inside the homestead, the air seemed thick with memories. Even the furniture bore scars of old lives, grooves in tables, dents in floorboards, and worn paths in the carpets where ancestors had walked countless times. The walls themselves seemed to hum with energy, vibrating faintly when no wind stirred. Some say you could hear muffled conversations echoing from the past if you pressed your ear close enough to the wood. Whispers of children long gone, of voices pleading, laughing, or chanting, blurred the line between memory and imagination. The Campbell children were raised within this atmosphere of secrecy and ritual. Their education was unlike that of ordinary Highland youth. Tutors, if any were trusted, were carefully selected and quickly dismissed if they asked too many questions. The children learned to observe without speaking, to obey without hesitation, and to trust only their bloodline. Outsiders described them as unnaturally mature for their years, yet often distant, their eyes reflecting the weight of centuries of family tradition. Even among the Highlands' rugged folk, the Campbells' practices stirred unease. It was said that certain trees in the forest marked boundaries, invisible lines that outsiders should never cross. Legends hinted at ceremonies conducted in the dead of night, where the eldest children vanished into the woods, returning with eyes wide, voices moved, and expressions forever altered. Some claimed these rites were designed to preserve the family line, others whispered of darker purposes, blood pacts, secret alliances with forces no one dared name. Despite the fear, curiosity lingered. Travelers occasionally left tokens at the forest's edge, trinkets, scraps of cloth, even letters, offerings to a family both feared and revered. Few survived to speak of the results. Most returned changed, quieter, haunted by visions that could not be explained, as if the Campbells themselves had reached inside their minds. The past, it seemed, was alive in that valley, shaping each step, each breath, each shadow. And in the quietest hours, when the mist rolled thick and the night stretched endlessly, the whispers grew louder, calling to anyone willing to listen. Next, we discover the strange births and dark omens that would mark the Campbell children, setting the stage for a legacy steeped in terror. Chapter 4. Strange Births and Dark Omens. The Campbell family's isolation was not only a matter of geography, but of blood. Over generations, their children were born into a lineage so insular that every birth carried an unspoken weight. Midwives whispered of unusual traits, children with unnerving eyes, hair darker than the midnight sky, or small knowing smiles that chilled even the most stoic observers. Some were born with delicate deformities, subtle but persistent, like the valley itself had left its mark on them. It was said the land held secrets, and the Campbells respected them, or perhaps feared them. Pregnant mothers were secluded, sometimes for months, in cottages hidden deep within the forest, where only family and trusted servants could enter. Their labor was attended by midwives who dared not ask questions and who left trembling, haunted, and silent. Each child's arrival was both a cause for celebration and a moment of quiet dread, for it was never clear which child would carry the full weight of the family's legacy. Omens followed every birth. A sudden chill might sweep through the valley, leaving frost on the cottage windows in the middle of summer. Animals avoided the homestead, and dogs yelped at shadows invisible to human eyes. Some nights, when the moon hung low and pale, the villagers claimed to hear distant laughter, children playing, though none could see who or what was making it. The eldest children often displayed intelligence and cunning beyond their years. They learned quickly, observed quietly, and understood secrets that should have been beyond their comprehension. Outsiders, even those invited into the home, reported a feeling of being watched, their every action analyzed by small, calculating eyes. These were not ordinary children, and every family gathering reinforced the sense that something unseen but undeniably present governed too, as a household. Even as they played in the fields, whispers followed them. The wind seemed to murmur warnings, the trees bent slightly toward the forest, and shadows clung unnaturally close. Visitors who dared linger reported dreams that felt more like memories of the children's laughter that was sometimes sweet, sometimes chilling, and occasionally edged with an inexplicable malice. The Campbell parents never spoke of these omens, treating them as natural, inevitable, perhaps even necessary. In their eyes, the children were both heirs and vessels, conduits for traditions and powers that outsiders could neither comprehend nor survive. And as each child grew, subtle changes became apparent: curiosity about hidden places, fascination with rituals, a growing awareness that their family was unlike any other. Next, we discover the secrets buried deep in the woods, hidden chambers and forgotten paths where the Campbell children would learn the true nature of their heritage. Chapter 5. Secrets, buried in the woods. Beyond the Campbell homestead, the forest stretched thick and unyielding, a tangle of brambles, twisted trees, and moss-covered stones. Outsiders rarely ventured more than a few yards into its depths. Those who did often returned, shaken, whispering of shadows that moved against the wind and sounds that had no source. Within this dense green maze, the Campbells had hidden the true heart of their family's secrets. Paths, worn smooth by centuries of careful feet, wound through the woods like veins, connecting the homestead to places outsiders could never imagine. Hidden chambers were carved into hillsides, small stone rooms dug into the earth, their entrances disguised with thickets or fallen logs. Some were simple storage spaces, others contained strange symbols etched into walls and floors, markings that hinted at rites performed in secrecy, their meanings known only to the family. The children were taught early to navigate these woods. Even the youngest could recognize paths invisible to outsiders, using moss patterns, tree scars, and the alignment of stars to guide their way. Games of hide-and-seek became lessons in stealth and observation. Laughter often masked training for purposes the children themselves only began to understand as they matured. It was in these hidden places that rituals took root. Candles were placed in precise formations, strange figurines made from clay or carved wood stood in silent rows, and the air carried a scent both earthy and unsettling, like a mixture of smoke, herbs, and iron. The forest seemed alive here, aware, as if it cooperated with the family's designs. Outsiders spoke of feeling watched, of hearing whispers that echoed from the ground itself, as though the earth remembered every secret buried within it. Legends among neighboring villagers hinted at dark bargains and protective charms, but none dared speak in detail. Some claimed that travelers who strayed too close to these paths were never seen again, their fates absorbed silently into the valley. Others insisted that the family's children were trained to guard the woods, becoming as much a part of the shadows as the trees themselves. Even on bright sunny days, the forest exuded a quiet menace. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, leaving pools of shadow where movement could go unnoticed. The Campbells' footsteps were soundless, and the forest itself seemed to bend around them, guiding, protecting, and hiding what outsiders could never see. Next, we discover how the eldest Campbell children vanish in the night, leaving only shadows behind, and the first hints of the family's chilling ceremonies come to light.
Chapter 6. The Eldest Children's Disappearance. The night fell heavy over the Campbell Valley, swallowing the homestead in inky darkness. The wind moaned through the trees, carrying with it whispers that seemed almost human, brushing against the cottages and rattling the shutters. It was during nights like these that the eldest Campbell children vanished, slipping silently into the shadows, leaving only faint impressions in the dew-soaked earth. No doors were broken, no windows forced. The children disappeared as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. Only the youngest, or those too timid to follow, remained behind, staring into the darkness with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Parents spoke little, their faces calm but unreadable, as though these disappearances were natural, necessary, part of some terrible rite older than memory. Outsiders could only shiver at the thought, imagining the terror and fascination that intertwined in these nightly vanishings. Those few villagers who had dared to watch from a distance reported seeing flickering torches among the trees, shadowy figures moving in careful formation, and an eerie chanting carried faintly on the wind. The forest seemed alive, bending paths and masking trails, as though guiding the children toward a destination known only to the Campbells. Some swore the children returned changed, quieter, eyes sharper, movements more deliberate, as if a piece of the forest, or something older, had taken residence within them. The disappearance of the children was not always permanent. On occasion, the eldest would reappear at dawn, stumbling from the woods with a glazed look and stories that made no sense. They spoke of places that did not exist on any map, of doors that opened into the earth, of figures cloaked in shadow who whispered secrets in voices both alluring and terrifying. Their words were fragmented, like fragments of dreams, yet each carried an unmistakable undertone of fear and obedience. Inside the homestead, the family treated these nights with reverence. Meals were quiet, rooms were dimly lit, and the youngest children were reminded, gently but firmly, that curiosity could be dangerous. Questions were answered in riddles, instructions in gestures, and lessons in silence. It was here that the children began to understand the dual nature of their inheritance: power and peril, secrecy and survival, tradition and terror. The forest, the homestead, and the children were intertwined in a pattern older than the Highlands themselves. Every night, every ritual, every disappearance reinforced the invisible threads that bound them together, shaping the family in ways outsiders could neither predict nor endure. Next, we discover the first glimpses of the Campbell family's rituals at the moonlight clearing, where the forest itself seems to bow to a dark and hidden authority. Chapter 7. Rituals at the moonlight clearing. Deep in the heart of the forest, where the trees grew twisted and the mist clung like a living shroud, lay a small clearing bathed in moonlight. This was the place where the Campbell family conducted their most sacred rites, hidden from the eyes of the world. Outsiders who stumbled upon it spoke of unnatural silence. No wind, no rustle of leaves, as if the clearing itself existed apart from time. On certain nights, the eldest children would be led to this clearing, their footsteps light and careful, guided by the parents and older relatives whose faces were solemn and unreadable. Candles flickered in a precise circle, casting long shadows that danced across the gnarled roots and low-hanging branches. The air was thick with incense and an earthiness that was at once comforting and unsettling, hinting at rituals older than memory. Whispers accompanied every movement. Words were spoken in a language older than Gaelic, syllables that seemed to tug at the mind and body, shaping the children even before they understood what was happening. Each child was given a task, a gesture, a chant, or a small offering, and told it was essential to the family's survival. Failure was not spoken of aloud, but the threat hung silently in the glint of the parents' eyes and the tense posture of the older siblings. Observers from outside, few though they were, described a scene simultaneously beautiful and horrifying. Figures moving in perfect symmetry, shadows stretching unnaturally under the silvered light, the faint sound of a heartbeat or chant that did not belong to any single human. Some insisted that the children seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, their eyes reflecting the flames in ways that suggested awareness far beyond their years. Even those born in the clearing carried marks of the ritual afterward, a subtle change in gaze, an instinctive caution, a whispered knowledge that the forest, the family, and the night itself were intertwined in ways outsiders could never hope to comprehend. It was here, beneath the silent canopy, that the Campbells passed down their most guarded secrets, embedding fear, obedience, and understanding in the youngest members of the line. And yet, for all its solemnity, there was a thrill in the air, a sense that the family was touching something larger, something unseen, and perhaps dangerous. Each night in the clearing strengthened the invisible bonds, ensuring that no member would ever stray from the path the family had carved across centuries. Next, we discover what happens when an outsider dares to enter the Campbell woods, a visitor whose curiosity may awaken forces far older and more terrifying than he could imagine. Chapter 8. An outsider dares to visit. For decades, the Campbell Valley had been left undisturbed by the wider world, its secrets guarded by mist, trees, and fear. But curiosity has a stubborn way of breaking barriers, and one late summer evening a stranger appeared. He was a young scholar, drawn by tales of the Highlands' remote families, old legends, and the whispered stories of the Campbell lineage. His presence, though quiet and careful, set in motion a chain of events that would awaken shadows long dormant. The stranger's approach was cautious. He observed the homestead from the edge of the forest, noting the stone walls, the shuttered windows, and the peculiar geometry of the paths leading away from the cottage. There was a rhythm to the land, a sense that the forest itself was alive and aware, and he felt it immediately. The subtle pull of unseen eyes following his every move. Yet his fascination overrode caution, and he pressed forward. Inside the homestead, life went on as usual. The children played near the edges of the forest, their laughter soft but deliberate, eyes sharp and calculating. The parents moved with quiet precision, performing tasks that seemed mundane, yet carried an air of ritual, as though even the smallest chores were imbued with hidden meaning. The stranger observed, taking notes, his pen scratching across the page as he tried to capture the balance of normalcy and menace. But the forest does not forgive intrusion. That night, as the moon rose, shadows began to shift, twisting between trees, flickering in the candlelight that spilled from the windows. The eldest children, ever watchful, noticed him immediately. They exchanged glances, silent communications that carried both curiosity and warning. For the stranger, every step deeper into the woods heightened tension. The air seemed heavier, sounds sharper, and the distant chanting, faint, yet unmistakable, reached his ears. By the time he reached the clearing, he was no longer an observer, but an intruder. The family's rituals were already underway. Candles flickered in perfect circles, shadows moved with deliberate rhythm, and the children participated with an understanding far beyond their years. The stranger froze as he realized the full weight of the valley's secrets. He was standing in a world where ordinary rules no longer applied, where every sound, every movement carried consequence. Next, we discover the first signs of nightmares creeping into the innocent, as the Campbell children's world begins to bleed into the stranger's reality. Chapter 9. Nightmares of the Innocent. The stranger had underestimated the subtle power of the Campbell Valley. That night, even as he retreated to a hidden nook at the edge of the clearing, he could not escape the forest's influence. The air seemed thicker, pressing against his chest, and shadows danced in shapes that made his skin crawl. Every whisper of wind carried the echoes of children's laughter both sweet and sinister. bending reality in ways he could not comprehend. Inside the homestead, the Campbell children slept fitfully. Their dreams were not ordinary. Even at rest, they were connected to the family's secrets, absorbing knowledge and fear like roots drawing water from soil. Some would wake screaming, their small bodies trembling, while others sat silently, eyes open in the dark, whispering words no one outside could understand. Each child carried in their mind an inheritance older than the valley itself, an understanding of rituals and boundaries that were incomprehensible to ordinary humans. The stranger, huddled beneath a twisted oak, could see them moving through the shadows as if guided by unseen hands. Every gesture was precise, every glance purposeful. It was a silent choreography, a dance older than memory, and he felt the weight of it pressing on his mind. He tried to leave, but the forest itself seemed to resist, branches curling toward him, roots brushing his feet, guiding him back to the clearing. Some nights, villagers claimed, the children would speak aloud in a voice that was not wholly their own. Words of warning, words of command, and sometimes whispers of prophecy. The stranger heard fragments, warnings in the darkness, half-formed sentences that promised revelation but threatened despair. It was clear to him that innocence and corruption, playfulness and terror were inseparable in the valley, and yet there was a beauty in it, a haunting symmetry. The children's eyes reflected the flames in the clearing, glinting with knowledge, power, and something almost supernatural. They were both prey and predator, student and master, trapped within a lineage that demanded obedience but rewarded cunning. The stranger realized that the valley did not merely protect the family, it had shaped them into something the world was not meant to encounter. Next, we discover the forbidden tomes and hidden chambers that contain the Campbell family's darkest knowledge, secrets that could unravel the stranger's mind completely.
Did you know archaeologists and geneticists have uncovered one of the earliest confirmed cases of close inbreeding in human history from over 5,000 years ago at the ancient Newgrange Passage tomb in Ireland, a monumental prehistoric burial site older than the Egyptian pyramids? In a study published in the scientific journal Nature, researchers analyzed ancient DNA extracted from remains buried deep within the tomb chamber. Their findings revealed that the individual's parents were first-degree relatives, meaning they were either siblings or parent and child, a form of incest rarely seen outside elite dynastic families in ancient societies. This suggests that among some prehistoric elites, close kin unions may have been socially sanctioned to preserve lineage or status. This discovery is significant because it shows that inbreeding and elite family practices existed at least 5,000 years ago in prehistoric Europe, a real historical parallel to themes of isolation and lineage you explore in your fictional Campbell narrative.
Chapter 10. Forbidden Tomes and Hidden Chambers. The stranger's curiosity pushed him deeper into the Campbell homestead, beyond the familiar rooms and familiar paths. Behind a false panel in the main hall, he discovered a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. The air was damp, heavy with dust and the faint scent of aged parchment. Each step echoed unnaturally, as if the house itself were aware of his intrusion. At the bottom, he found a hidden chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with books older than he could imagine. The tomes were bound in cracked leather, ink faded but still legible, containing knowledge the outside world had long forgotten. Symbols danced across the pages, diagrams of strange rituals, genealogies that traced the Campbell bloodline back centuries, and notes in margins written in meticulous hand, hinting at practices that blurred the line between science, superstition, and something far darker. The chamber was not silent. Small objects, carved figures, bones, and remnants of herbs were arranged in precise patterns. A faint hum seemed to rise from the floorboards, resonating through the stranger's chest, compelling him to touch, to read, to understand. The weight of the family's legacy pressed down upon him, making the air tremble with unspoken warnings. As he leafed through the tomes, he realized the full extent of the Campbells' secretive knowledge. Rituals that had shaped the children, symbols that controlled the forest, and detailed records of disappearances, some of which seemed far older than the family itself. With each page, the stranger felt his mind bending, struggling to comprehend the implications, the hidden power, and the danger of exposure. The children's footsteps approached above him, silent, precise, watching. The stranger froze, knowing he was caught between curiosity and survival. The chamber seemed to pause, the shadows stretching as if alive, and he understood that these tomes were not mere records. They were instruments, tools of control, and keys to the family's enduring dominance over their land and their lineage. Fear and fascination battled within him. He wanted to flee, but the knowledge called to him, promising insight into secrets that no one outside the valley could ever understand. And as he glanced at the floor, he noticed faint markings etched in the stone, identical to the symbols in the books, sigils that bound him, in a sense, to the family's will. Next, we discover the Campbell bloodline's curse, a secret that ties the children, the forest, and the stranger in ways he could never have imagined.
Chapter 11. The Bloodline's Curse. The Campbell bloodline was more than isolation and secrecy. As the stranger pored over the forbidden tomes, a pattern became horrifyingly clear. Generations of the family had been shaped by a curse, not one of legend alone, but a carefully preserved legacy of inbreeding, rituals, and dark intent. Each child born carried the weight of the valley, the forest, and the family's unseen power. It was not simply genetics, it was expectation, destiny, and terror woven into flesh and bone. The curse manifested in subtle ways at first. Children were unusually perceptive, their senses attuned to things outsiders could not perceive, sounds, shadows, and intentions. Some bore physical traits that distinguished them, marks unnoticed by the casual eye, but significant to those who knew the lineage. Others displayed behavior so precise, so eerily deliberate, that villagers claimed they were older than their years, or touched by something beyond the world of men. But the curse was also a prison. Every ritual, every lesson in the moonlight clearing, every shadowed path in the forest was designed to strengthen the family line while controlling it. Knowledge and obedience were intertwined. Disobedience or curiosity could bring immediate consequences, often swift and invisible. It was a life built around secrecy, fear, and the constant presence of a power that seemed alive. The stranger realized with mounting dread that the curse was not only inherited, but enforced. The children's fates were pre-written, their paths determined by rituals, symbols, and the forest itself. Even the forest seemed to conspire, bending paths, hiding entrances, and guiding behaviors as if it were a living extension of the family's will. And any outsider who entered risked more than exposure. They risked becoming part of the pattern, a thread woven into the curse they could, but neither comprehend nor escape. Whispers in the chamber confirmed it. Notes left by ancestors described the curse in chilling detail, the intertwining of bloodlines, the ceremonial rites, and the protection of the valley from outsiders. A single error could unravel the family's power, while obedience ensured the continuation of their shadowed dominance. Every generation, every child, every ritual contributed to the same invisible web of control. The stranger, for the first time, felt the true weight of what he had uncovered. He was not merely witnessing history or legend, he was standing in a living cycle of darkness, one that had been building for centuries. The children, the forest, and the family were bound together by this curse, and the consequences for intrusion were far greater than he could imagine. Next, we discover how madness begins to creep into the Campbells themselves, twisting reason and fear into something far more dangerous than any outsider could face. Chapter 12. Madness. Among the Campbells, the Campbell family's curse did not affect only the children. It seeped into every branch of the bloodline, twisting thought and reason like roots choking a tree. The parents, once stern and composed, began to show cracks. Small murmurs in empty rooms, muttered phrases in the middle of the night, and fleeting glances toward unseen corners revealed that even they were prisoners of the very rituals they had orchestrated. Madness was subtle at first, almost invisible, but it spread quickly through the household. Inside the homestead, rooms that had once felt solemn now carried an edge of menace. Furniture was moved slightly each day, not by anyone's hand, but as though the house itself shifted with intention. The children, unusually perceptive, noticed these changes immediately. They began to anticipate the movements of shadows, the flickers of light, and even the unpredictable behaviors of their parents. Whispers, often in the language of the old rituals, echoed through hallways, carrying fear, command, and sometimes laughter that had no origin. The stranger, hidden and observing, noticed the signs of deteriorating sanity. The parents' faces sometimes twisted into grimaces without cause. Their eyes, once calm, flickered with panic or fury when the ritual demands became too heavy, too complex. Conversations that should have been simple devolved into cryptic exchanges, half-completed sentences, and moments of silence that hung thick like fog. The children, trained to perceive everything, mirrored the tension, moving silently through corridors with a wariness beyond their years. Even the forest seemed to notice. On nights when madness peaked, the wind shrieked through the trees with a sharpness that suggested understanding. Shadows elongated unnaturally, moving as if to mock or mirror the household's tension. The ritual spaces, the emsos, own light clearing, the hidden chambers, became charged with unease, the air heavy with expectation and the threat of unseen consequences. For the stranger, the sense of dread became unbearable. He could feel the creeping instability, the way every action, every glance, every whispered word could ignite panic or confusion. Madness was no longer a distant possibility. It was a living, breathing presence that hung over the Campbell family like a storm cloud, touching everything and everyone in the valley. And yet, the family endured, bound tightly by blood, ritual, and the curse itself. Each moment of insanity was absorbed into their pattern, reinforcing the invisible threads that had controlled them for generations. Madness was not weakness here. It was a tool, a weapon, a bond. And any outsider who dared step too close risked being consumed by it as well. Next we discover what happens when the stranger's fatal curiosity drives him deeper into the heart of the Campbell Valley, confronting forces far older than himself. Chapter 13. A Stranger's Fatal Curiosity. The stranger had ventured too far. Each step into the heart of the Campbell Valley tightened the invisible threads that bound him to the family and their cursed land. What had begun as mere observation had turned into obsession, a dangerous desire to understand, to record, to uncover what no outsider had lived to describe. With each passing hour, the forest seemed to watch him more intently, the shadows growing longer, heavier, almost sentient. He found himself at the edge of the moonlight clearing again, the same place where the children had learned their lessons and where the rituals unfolded under the silent approval of ancient trees. The flickering candlelight illuminated movements that were both beautiful and terrifying. The children in precise patterns, their parents guiding them with gestures both gentle and commanding. The stranger could feel the forest's pulse, and it was not welcoming. It beat in rhythm with the family, echoing in his chest, forcing his thoughts into a haze of fear and fascination. Curiosity drove him closer, despite every instinct screaming to flee. He leaned against a tree, notebook in hand, trying to make sense of the ceremonies, the circles of candles, the whispered chants, the strange symbols etched in the dirt. But the closer he came, the more aware he became that he was not merely observing. He was being observed. Small, calculating eyes followed him from the shadows. The air itself seemed to thicken around him, carrying the scent of herbs, smoke, and something metallic. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made him freeze. The eldest children had noticed him. They moved silently, converging in a way that seemed rehearsed, predatory and unavoidable. One stepped forward, eyes glinting in the moonlight, and spoke a word in the old language, a word that chilled him to the bone, though he did not understand it. The forest seemed to lean closer, branches bending, shadows stretching, drawing him into the center of the clearing, whether he wanted to go or not. The stranger realized too late that curiosity was no longer a choice. It was a trap, a force that had drawn him into a world where ordinary rules did not apply. The children's laughter, soft but unnerving, filled the air, a sound both innocent and deadly, warning him of the consequences of intrusion. Every instinct, every survival skill he possessed seemed useless against the valley's power, the family's presence, and the unseen forces that lingered among the trees. Next, we discover the fire that should never have burned, a night when the valley itself seemed to erupt in chaos, testing the limits of the stranger and the Campbells alike. Chapter 14. The Fire That Shouldn't Burn. That night, the Campbell Valley changed. A fire ignited in the forest, sudden and unnatural, licking the underbrush with orange tongues that twisted and roared without warning. The stranger saw it first, a faint glow behind the trees that quickly escalated into a wall of heat and smoke. The forest, normally a silent sentinel, now seemed alive with movement, as shadows darted and danced along the flames, bending the light in ways that were impossible to follow. Inside the homestead, the family moved with urgent precision. Children and parents alike navigated the house and surrounding grounds as if trained for this very moment. Yet the fire was no ordinary blaze. It refused to consume everything equally. Some areas remained untouched, as if invisible hands guided the flames, directing them with intention. Candles flickered in response, shadows stretching longer, merging with the smoke, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to watch the stranger and the family alike. The stranger struggled to comprehend what he saw. The flames were mesmerizing yet terrifying, reflecting the madness and rituals he had witnessed in earlier nights. The moonlight clearing, usually a place of ritual and order, now appeared chaotic, but beneath the chaos was a strange, deliberate design. Every movement of the children, every gesture of the parents, aligned with the fire as though it were part of a pattern he could not understand. Panic threatened to overtake him, but the forest would not allow him to leave. Smoke curled unnaturally around him, twisting like fingers, obscuring the path he had followed in. In the clearing, the eldest children guided younger ones through the fire's edge, their movements eerily calm, unaffected by the heat and chaos. The stranger realized that the flames were not random. They were controlled, or at least respected, by the family, serving as a test or ritual he could not hope to survive unscathed. From the shadows, whispers rose again, mingling with the crackle of fire. The house, the children, the forest, and even the flames themselves seemed bound together in a terrifying harmony. Every step the stranger took drew him deeper into the valley's invisible web, threatening to trap him in the very patterns that had shaped the Campbells for generations. Next we discover the hidden altar, a place where the valley's secrets are most dangerous, and where the stranger must confront truths older than the mountains themselves. Chapter 15. The Hidden Altar. At the center of the moonlight clearing, hidden beneath centuries of moss and twisted roots, lay the Campbell family's most sacred secret, a stone altar, ancient and scarred, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly in the firelight. The stranger stumbled upon it as he followed the children, who moved with unnerving precision, guiding him unknowingly toward the heart of the valley's power. The altar was simple in structure, yet overwhelming in presence, radiating a force that seemed older than the mountains themselves. Candles circled the altar in perfect symmetry, their flames flickering without wind. Herbs, bones, and small carved figurines were arranged deliberately, each object imbued with meaning beyond the outsider's comprehension. The eldest children circled the altar, their chants soft but insistent, voices layered with echoes of ancestors who had performed the same rites for centuries. The stranger felt a weight pressing on him. The air was thick, vibrating with history, expectation, and something undeniably alive. The parents observed from the periphery, their expressions calm yet commanding. They did not speak. They merely guided with gestures and glances, as though their presence alone reinforced the invisible threads binding the children to the ritual. The stranger's heart pounded as he realized the true scale of the family's influence. This was not simply tradition or superstition. It was control, power, and a preservation of lineage that had been enforced for generations. He stepped closer, notebook trembling in his hands. Every instinct warned him to flee, but the pull of knowledge was irresistible. The children's eyes met his briefly, not with malice, but with understanding. They knew he was there, and in their gaze was a silent warning. Some truths are dangerous not because of what they reveal, but because of what happened, is when they are uncovered. As the chant reached its climax, the altar seemed to pulse. Shadows lengthened, the air grew warmer, and the stranger felt his mind teetering on the edge of comprehension. The family's history, their rituals, and their curse converged in that single space. He understood, with cold certainty, that the valley itself was alive, that the forest, the children, and the hidden altar were parts of a living mechanism, one that had been operating in secret for centuries, untouched and unchallenged. Next, we discover the stranger's fate as he faces the valley's ultimate test, one that could consume him entirely or bind him forever to the Campbell legacy.
Chapter 16. The Valley's Ultimate Test. The stranger stood frozen at the edge of the hidden altar, the pulsing energy of the Campbell Valley pressing down upon him. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet he was rooted in place, caught in the invisible web that bound the forest, the family, and himself together. The children's chants rose in harmony, a haunting cadence that resonated in his chest, reverberating through the soil and bones alike. He realized that the valley was alive, and it had marked him as a participant, not an observer. As the ritual intensified, shadows around the clearing shifted unnaturally. The flames of the candles danced in patterns he could barely comprehend, and the forest seemed to close in, trees bending slightly, roots shifting as though guiding him forward. The eldest children stepped closer, their eyes reflecting both warning and expectation. They gestured to the stranger, inviting him, or perhaps daring him, to approach the altar. Every step felt like a descent deeper into a world older and darker than he could imagine. He reached the edge of the stone platform, hands trembling. The air was thick with the scent of herbs, smoke, and something metallic that hinted at the valley's centuries-old rituals. Symbols carved into the altar glowed faintly, feeding off the rhythm of the chants and the energy of the children. For the first time, the stranger understood the terrifying purpose of the Campbell rites. They were not merely ceremonial. They were a trial of mind, body, and spirit. Failure meant obliteration, not just physical but mental. To survive, he would have to submit to the valley's logic, the family's rules, and the pulse of the ancient curse itself. The children's voices rose, echoing across the forest. He felt himself pulled toward the altar, compelled to participate. Every movement, every breath, every heartbeat aligned him with the rhythm of the ritual. Panic clawed at him, yet he could not resist. The forest, the fire, the altar, and the family all converged, testing him, probing his fear, measuring his resolve. One wrong thought, one hesitation, and the valley would consume him entirely. And then, at the ritual's peak, a moment of clarity pierced through the terror. He glimpsed the intricate design of the Campbell legacy, the children, the forest, the altar, the curse, all intertwined in perfect, terrifying symmetry. He realized he was a part of it now, a participant in a cycle that had lasted centuries. Survival depended not on fleeing, but on understanding, on submission, on becoming a thread woven into the family's endless web. Next, we discover the final chapter of the Campbell legacy, the valley's secret revealed, the stranger's fate sealed, and the chilling conclusion to a lineage of shadows. Chapter 17. The Campbell legacy unveiled. The clearing was silent, save for the faint crackle of candles and the soft rustle of leaves in the midnight breeze. The stranger stood at the altar, heart hammering, mind teetering between comprehension and madness. Around him, the Campbell children moved with uncanny grace, their chants fading into whispers that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. He realized, with a cold certainty, that the valley was not merely a place. It was a living entity, shaped by generations of fear, ritual, and blood. The parents stepped forward, faces calm yet unreadable. For centuries the family had endured, weaving their lineage into the very fabric of the land. Now the stranger understood the full horror. The Campbell legacy was eternal. Every ritual, every secret, every vanished child had contributed to a pattern that the valley itself enforced. It was a cycle of dominance, survival, and control, a web that had now ensnared him. A faint glow rose from the altar, illuminating the carvings etched in stone for centuries. Symbols pulsed as though alive, resonating with the bloodline's energy. The stranger felt the pull of the valley's will, the invisible threads tightening around him. He understood that to survive, even partially, he must acknowledge the family's authority, submit to the rhythm of their legacy, and accept the reality that he could never leave unchanged. The children's eyes met his one last time, sharp, calculating, yet hauntingly serene. They were both witnesses and enforcers, embodiments of the curse that had been cultivated for generations. In that moment, the stranger felt a strange clarity, fear, fascination, and understanding all intertwined. The valley had not destroyed him completely, but it had imprinted its truth upon him forever. As the first light of dawn touched the mountains, the forest fell quiet. The state ranger, now irrevocably altered, made his way to the edge of the valley. He carried knowledge that would terrify anyone who heard it, yet he also carried the weight of secrecy, understanding that some truths are too dangerous to reveal. The Campbell family remained in their clearing, guardians of shadows, rituals, and a legacy older than memory itself. And so, the valley endured, the children thrived, and the Campbell legacy continued, hidden, powerful, and eternal, a secret whispered only in the trembling shadows of the Highlands. The end.